Well, it's good to be back after a couple of weeks of vacation. It was really quick in a lot of ways. At the same time, we really missed everyone, especially on the Sundays. Um, and it's actually, I know that this is one of the Sundays, a lot of us are gone as well, but it's actually such a privilege to worship together. And so good to see everyone. A lot happened during our trip. I mean, little accidents on my part. My wife got rear-ended, in a rental car, where all kinds of little accidents here and there. But ultimately, that wasn't what kind of stuck with me. Even though we had a great time, we ate a lot of yummy food and saw some beautiful sights. What stuck with me was what was happening in our country. And just even out in Seattle, happy Seattle, well-caffeinated Seattle, I could feel the tension that was going on. And if you've been following the news, it was started off in Charlottesville, the campus of University of Virginia, where these alt-right groups, or these extremely right groups came together, KKK, neo-Nazis, fascists, groups that would never, ever come under one roof. For whatever reason, they felt so emboldened to do so. They found a cause. A statue of General E. Lee, a Confederate general, was being taken down. And because of that, they wanted to establish their rights. And what seemed to be at first a quote-unquote plan to be a peaceful protest, you saw that they came out with their tiki torches, and they were yelling stuff like, "Jews, we will not be replaced." They were brandishing not only Confederate flags, but swastikas, and it was an ugly scene. While others were aware that this was happening, and they wanted to demonstrate that theirs is not the voice of America, that white supremacy is not necessarily something that they're going to sit still for, and they stood up. And they came to go ahead and contest them. But you can tell that actually the groups that came, they were prepared. Their strategy, their playbook was they wanted to incite violence, to basically say that it wasn't them. They came with shields, they came with body armor, they came with weapons that were actually more expensive and better than the militia's weapons. The militias were afraid to dive in because they came heavily armed. But the counter-protesters, actually, they were surprisingly courageous. And they were saying, "No, this is not good. We don't believe in you. White supremacy is not the rule of the land." And everything was as is, but until, as you know, this one 20-year-old man decided in his anger to basically get into his car. This is not a station wagon. This is not an SUV. This is a Dodge Challenger. This thing can run. And if you see the video footage, it looks like he's just ran into a couple cars. But from this angle, you can see he doesn't see cars. He sees protesters. And he just ran into this crowd. He was trying to mow down this crowd. If it wasn't for the cars that were right behind this, more people would have died. But even so, one woman died from her injuries, and 19 plus were injured. It's just the thought of somebody, driving their car into a crowd. Just it's one thing you see this in what ISIS does or in Europe, but the thought that this would be something happening in this quiet university town. I have family that went to this university. It just kind of really unsettled me. There was this at first confusion, like, is this really happening? And then the response from our government figures was even more like, what is going on? Just the building sense of frustration and anger that this is actually really there. What shocked me even further was that the people who were at this, they were the ones saying, "No, this is not us. This is not us. This is all of the quote unquote alt left, which doesn't exist." And this is actually a tweet from the organizer of this whole Unite the Right. This guy named Jason Kessler, and he wrote, the woman who died, by the way, who from her injuries, he wrote, "Heather Heyer was a fat, disgusting communist. Communists have killed 94 million people. Looks like it was payback time." And if you just sit for a second and think, what would possess this man to call a woman who was run down and say that she deserved it because she was a communist? He doesn't know her. On top of that it was right to have payback. Now, he took this down immediately, and other people actually tried to cover for him, saying, "Yeah, I hacked his account." But later on, he said, "No, it was because I was off on a cocktail of different meds and so on and so forth." But basically, this was in his thought, and this is not just him. What kind of anger would roost in a certain person's soul to see somebody run over like that, and instead of be shocked and angry at the guy who did it, but say she deserved it. It was payback. These are some glimpses of just some incredible hate, some incredible, disgusting, ugly pictures of what's around. And honestly, it was one thing to kind of watch the news and pay attention to all of this. It was another thing to be in Seattle, like I said. I don't know what was going on. And at first I just thought, we had a rental car and it was California plates and everybody was angry at us. And okay, that's just because of the California plates. But there was a couple incidents where I realized it wasn't the fact that we were Californians in the eyes of the drivers. I was driving down my the road to get to my mother-in-law's house where we were staying, and it's kind of in the city, so there's not a lot of room. In fact, there's cars parked on either side. There's only room for one car to get through at the same time. So here I am, and I see this car zooming at me really fast. And so I get out of the way. And as I'm getting out of the way, the guy looks at me, sees my face, and then just sticks out a finger. I was like, what the? I got out of his way to be nice and polite, and I realized later on it's because I'm not white. It's happened several times, even to my wife. And I see the look on this guy's face. It's actually this older white person. And he was so angry, I could see him. And I was kind of like, okay, I got to get out of the car. And if he comes at us, I have to be ready. It was that kind of, this is in Seattle. These are nice, polite people. But I'm realizing there is this undercurrent of just anger. Even the people who are not associated with the violent alt-right, they're actually full of anger. Anger is being spilled across both ways, always. And sometimes it feels right. Sometimes it feels right. When you see something like this, if you're not getting angry, something's wrong with you. At the same time, there is this danger that anger can just take control, not only of our dialogue, of our country, but of our hearts. So as I was wrestling with the anger in my own heart, and I was kind of wondering, God, how should I pray through this? Knowing that He'll take my grief. Now, I was actually at a church, at a white church actually, on one of the Sundays, and I was just feeling a sense of incredible sorrow, like not just for the person who died, but just the state of our country and just the people around. I was just feeling really sorrowful for whatever reason. And one of the persons who came to pray at that service, they helped me a lot because it was a white person. And she got up and she prayed, and the first thing she says, God, forgive us. I feel so ashamed that somebody of my color did something like this. And as she was praying, some of that grief was released. But underneath that grief, even in my own heart, it was just anger. Because I grew up with this. I grew up with not just the anger, but the oppression and just the rejection. And it's starting to build. So I was letting my God kind of have access a bit to my soul, wondering about what I should preach, and I changed my sermon for this week. And I actually decided, even though we're going through the summer in the Psalms, we're going to stay in Psalms, but there's a certain Psalm that I returned to, Psalm 37, it's meaning a lot more to me today and now than it was before. I've preached on this Psalm, 2 verses 3 and 4, several times during my preaching time. And I gotta say honestly, I totally missed it. Because this psalm actually speaks to what I'm going through, speaks to what we might be going through. What do you do when you're surrounded, what it seems like evil? Surrounded with angry people, surrounded with people who are maybe even getting away with or getting forward with doing wrong. How do you respond? What is your strategy when there's injustice? What is your strategies when hate and evil is all around? As a person in Christ, one who knows Christ, what are you supposed to do? And this surprised me. It surprised me in a few ways. But we're going to cover Psalm 37 with that in mind, because the context of this psalm is David, who's lived a lifetime being attacked by unrighteous people, okay, being just physically, emotionally, and his reputation being attacked. He is actually echoing the strategy, the playbook by which we are supposed to respond to this kind of systemic, this kind of ugly, broken world where people are distrustful, angry, or even wicked. And what does he have us do? That's what we're going to look at today. Just a couple of notes on Psalm 37. It's 40 verses. That's a lot of verses. If you try to read Psalm 37 throughout, you get a little tired. And you don't realize, because they don't really help you to realize, that they're structured in a certain way. There are 40 verses, but it actually follows what's called an acrostic. It's kind of like, it's an alphabetical acrostic. Verse 1 starts with the Hebrew letter, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. And then there's 4 lines, and then the second letter, Beit, and 4 lines. Third letter, Gimel, Dalet, so on and so forth. All the way down, all 22 of the Hebrew letters kind of section off each of the 4 lines. So you wonder, why would somebody do this? In fact, there are a lot of the Psalms. There's, I think, 8 more of the Psalms that are acrostic. And Lamentations are also acrostic. Usually, when they make it like this, structure it so that's like, like an acrostic in alphabetic form, they want you to, there's a reason for it. And one of the possible reasons for this psalm is for you to realize this was actually an instructional poem. This wasn't something that you just read and you do devotion and forget about. Oh, isn't it nice? This was meant to, you were supposed to memorize this. It was packaged in a way that is easily memorizable. It's an instructional poem because David, as king, knows that his people, individuals as well as his people, the community, they need to know what to do when they face evil. What is God's strategy? And so he put it in a way where it's memorizable. And it's important for us to realize this is more than just platitudes, some nice principles to think about. It's actually very practical. What do you do when you're facing this kind of evil? First thing he says is, do not fret. That's the translation in the New International Version and others as well. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. That phrase, do not fret, it's kind of a nice phrase. It's like, it's almost a little poetic. Do not fret. When you have a bad day, do not fret. And usually we think fretting as somebody who's like a little anxious. Oh, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to, make my tea time at the golf course? Or am I going to get everything I want? Like you're nibbling on your teeth because you're a little anxious. But the better translation here, it's that fretting as worry or anxiety is not strong enough. The better translation here is, do not get consumed by anger, by rage, because the evil is right in front of your face. Do not get consumed by injustice. Do not get consumed when you see people who are just working the system and trashing others and still look like they're thriving. Do not get caught up in anger. This is a little clearer in verse 8, where he repeats this, that do not fret happens several times. Refrain from anger, turn from wrath, do not fret. Isn't that interesting? Okay, this is not just 2 separate things. Hebrew poetry means that those 2 doublets are related. He's explaining what does it mean to not fret. Do not get caught up in anger. Why? Because it only leads to evil. Now, interesting. Somebody does something bad to you, somebody does something bad to your loved one, and anger is a natural response. But he's saying, if that is your playbook to deal with what's going on, to raise up your base, make that a fuel for you actually to make things right even, you're on a course that it's going to lead toward evil. Because anger does not heal. Anger does not somehow, it's a nice fuel for the short term, but it does not bring about God's intention. It destroys you. It only leads to evil. Now this is interesting because a lot of us either have issues with anger or we're just not angry enough. Some of us don't want to get angry, so what do we do? What do? We don't look at it. My wife doesn't watch the news. She just can't handle it because she would get just so angry. She'd be like the Incredible Hulk. And so it's a bit of a, self-preservation and preservation for us, our family as well. But at the same time, when it's in your face and you can't just shake it, you need to know what to do. The first step is to realize anger in and of itself, when it consumes you, even when you feel like you are right, in the long run, only destroys your relationship with yourself and with God and others. I like this quote by Frederick Buechner. He's actually a very thoughtful writer. And he writes, of the 7 deadly sins, anger is possibly the most fun. Yeah, you get off on it. to lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontations to come. You plan it out, To savor to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are going to give back. In many ways, it is a feast for a king. You feel like you're in control. You feel like you're going to make things right. That anger is going to serve you right. But he says the chief drawback is that when you are what you are wolfing down in this feast of anger, you're wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. Something about your humanity has been burned up. I think there is a relationship between anger and trust, okay? Because when you're angry, it's because somebody's broken some measure of trust, okay? Some expectation, some understanding, some trust has been violated. And so anger erupts. But the interesting part is that anger doesn't restore trust, it just breaks more trust. The angrier you are, the more afraid you are of other people, and the more actually other people are afraid of you. Anger does not bring wholeness. It might be a fuel for the short term, but actually it is not the ultimate strategy. It's trust. Verse 3, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you desires of your heart. I use these two verses out of context. It was all about have a personal love relationship with God. Love God and everything will go fine. But it has a little extra kick now, doesn't it? When everything in the world is looking ugly and the people who are doing wrong look like they are not being held to account and they're thriving. That's the theme of this psalm. Guess what? How do you respond? Not by being consumed with anger and self-righteousness to fix it. Trust. Trust is the strategy. That trusting in God allows you actually to keep your relationships with other people, to build and bring healing to other people, to have the courage not only to say what is right and to stand up for what is right, but not return evil for evil, anger for anger, fire and fury for another person's wrong. Trust is the direction. This is actually very practical, surprisingly. Now, I grew up like most Asians. We were very much in the invisible. Anytime you're out in front, nobody really wants to pay attention to you. So you find safety through invisibility. But actually, these days we're finding that even Asians are getting really angry and they're coming out to the forefront. There's nothing wrong with actually saying what is true, but what's behind it? What's underneath it? And for those of us in Christ, we're going to be learning that this kind of rock solid, I know God, you see everything. I know God, you have a plan to redeem, and I'm going to do it your way. I'm not going to just try to fix it with my own smarts, with my own networking, and with my own righteous cause. He continues to say, commit your way to the Lord. Trust him, and guess what? God, he will do this. He's not only going to restore, he's not only going to heal, but he says he will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. In other words, as you stay doing it his way, doing it with kindness and love and grace and truth, guess what? Even though in the short term it looks like it's not worth it because other people are winning, in the long run, he is going to show all of this to be true. You did it the right way. He's going to heal and restore. Continue on. Be still before the Lord. Wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways. Instead, shine like the dawn when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. You see, he said that 3 times. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. This is the strategy. Watch your own heart. Even the right anger, let it dissipate. Let it fall at the feet of Christ. let him take that grief and that anger, and let it resound in, God, you can handle this. You're watching over me. You're loving, you're good, you're wise. And then be ready to do what he asks us to do. Because there's a promise here. If you follow this strategy, it doesn't lead to your destruction. Instead, it gives you the strength, the courage to outlast evil. Because you know that evil is not going to stay. It's not going to win in the end. Ultimately, God is going to totally wipe out evil. Later on in the psalm, David reflects on his life and he says, I've seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree. He saw people who at the short term look like by the way that they're doing wrong, they're getting rich and they're getting fat and they look like their life is good. But, he says, soon he passed away and was no more. Though I looked for him, he could not be found. What is he saying? It looked like this is the state of affairs, that evil wins all the time. But before he knew it, this guy was gone. A little blip. Consider the blameless, however. Let's continue on, verse 37. Observe the upright. Blameless doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It just means that you're following the route of God. You're doing his strategy. Consider the blameless, observe the upright. A future awaits those who seek peace. But all sinners will be destroyed. There will be no future for the wicked. There is this clear sense. The strategy is you outlast evil. You don't return evil with evil. You do good because you trust in God. Verse 10 and 11 finish off. And a little while, the wicked will be no more. Though you will look for them, they will not be found. And this is the very counterintuitive thing about this. It's echoed even by Christ himself. But it's not the strong, it's not the violent, it's not the angry, people fueled by anger. They will not inherit the land, but it's the meek. The meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. What does it mean to be meek? Somebody who is meek is not somebody who is weak and scared and, I can't say that. Somebody who is meek is so strong, but they don't just use their strength to destroy everyone. They have a restrained strength for justice, but they know how to show mercy. They know how to not let their hearts just spill out and destroy. This is a description of who Christ is, but it's a promise from Christ. He echoes this. Blessed are the meek. It's not the sons of the enemy, of Satan, who murder and who lie and who are cheat and who destroy. Not those are the ones who are not going to inherit the earth. It's the ones who look like the Father, who actually know how to forgive, who know how to do good, who return good for evil. They will inherit the earth. So what's the strategy? Have this trust in God that he knows what he's doing, and then do good. It's not simply sit back, watch it all happen, and you stay in your own bubble. It's knowing God and knowing his ways, trusting him not only for your own life, but for those who you love. You go and do good. Sometimes doing good means standing up against evil, but not in a violent way, not in a way that actually anger takes you over. I love that. These are related. Trust in the Lord and do good. You cannot do good if you don't trust in the Lord, because even that good ends up being destructive. But when you trust in the Lord, when you really trust in him, it flows out in actions. Later on in this chapter, in this psalm, it talks about how the wicked are never generous, but the good, those who are righteous, they are always giving to the poor. There's a care, there's a healing that happens. While some are making money and ripping people off, it's those who trust in the Lord that actually can take care of the poor and do good, that can actually go and mediate, that can forgive, that actually can even stand up and in the midst of all this hate, not with anger, but with kindness. That is our playbook. Do good. I'm going to finish with Psalm 37, verses 5 through 6. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. That's what we have to hold on to. One phrase that is still kind of ringing in my heart was a scholar wrote this in explaining, like, what is this nature of trust? Why does God want trust so much? And he wrote this way: trust is like an open door. It's like opening a door to God's capacity to act. He is going to act, but he chooses to use our trust. It's like opening the door for God to move. When we trust him, when we commit to him and his ways, his playbook, he is now free. The door has been opened for him to act. And when he acts, he vindicates that trust. Would you bow your heads as we begin to pray a little?